The wolf's howl, heavy and grim, didn't soar into the twilight sky, but crept low, hugging the ground along the outskirts of Svenets. It slithered like a beast itself, sniffing for something around the edge of the town. At the sound of this eerie howl, the drunkards leaving the tavern sobered instantly. Couples lingering in the streets flinched. More than one young woman, without realizing it, clung to her beau's chest at that moment. And the young men, every single one, didn't embrace their companions, but instead touched the handles of their knives. It was terrifying. Terrifying to hear that howl under the open sky in the twilight, with no solid walls to offer protection. And yet, even the walls didn't seem all that sturdy when the somber voice of the beast reached the townsfolk's ears. People rushed to slam their shutters closed and secure them with iron hooks, even though the summer evening outside was oppressively hot. At her inn, the Peaceful Hearth, Nesvana, the proprietress, grabbed the shutters with both hands, then froze, listening to the half-dark outside. "Auntie Nesvana," came a timid voice from behind her. It was Daryanka, the orphan girl she had taken in. Why would it come hunting in Svenets in the summer? "It's not even winter without turning," Nesvana replied. "It's not hunting, Daryona. And it's not calling its pack. It's looking for something. And it's deeply mourning." Daryonka said nothing. She didn't ask how Nesvana could know that. The wolf certainly hadn't told her, had it? But she didn't ask because Nesvana truly seemed to know more than the other women in Svenets. Where Nesvana had come from, how she had lived before arriving in the town, she spoke sparingly about such things. Besides, those stories might not have been true. But Daryanka had lived in the Peaceful Hearth for 2 years now. Ever since she'd been orphaned, Nesvana had taken her in. And it's hard to live so close to someone for that long and not learn a thing or two about them. Sometimes Nesvana would tell Daryanka tales. Whether they were folk tales or true stories, the girl couldn't always tell, about a girl named Iva, who had been an apprentice to the sorceress Chernova before falling in love with a traveling young man and running away with him. More than once, Daryanka had thought, "Oh, she's telling me about herself." Nesvana seemed to know a lot about the ways of supernatural creatures. Sometimes Daryanka felt the woman could even understand the language of beasts and birds. Just recently, for example, she had crossed the yard and casually snapped at a loudly cawing crow. "Oh, shut it, you old fool." Now she was intently listening to the wolf's howl fading into the distance. Finally, she let go of the shutters without closing the window. It's gone back to the forest. Whatever it was looking for, it didn't find it. Well, no matter. It has its own business, and we have ours. Now tell me, my dear, why haven't you been home these evenings? I try to get more chores done in the morning, Auntie Nesvana, and in the evenings I run off to swim with the girls. Daryanka began to rattle off excuses, but the innkeeper stopped her with a wave of her hand. The last few days you've been disappearing in the mornings too, even though it's the busiest time, with the inn full of guests and me short on help. Don't make that guilty face. I'm not too mad. I get it. The fair's in town. You want to wander the market square, buy gingerbread or ribbons. I even gave you coins for that, didn't I? Thank you, Auntie Nesvana. I'll make it up to you. Oh, she'll make it up, will she? The fair will end, the guests will leave, the peaceful hearth will be empty, and there'll be hardly any work left. Then she'll make it up, right? Did you hear that, good people? There were no good people to answer her question because the few guests who hadn't already left had gone to bed early and were peacefully asleep upstairs. Downstairs by the window it was just Nesvana and Daryanka. The girl wasn't frightened by the innkeeper's scolding words. Nesvana never heard her. She'd rant for a bit and then let it go. And sure enough, she was already starting to soften. Well, fine. There's always work to do if you're willing. And you're young? It's natural to want to see people and be seen yourself. But don't tell me you've just been swimming in the evenings. You've been dancing in the square with the boys and girls, haven't you? I've heard all about it. And why not? You're 14 already. It's the perfect age for dancing with boys. As for me, an old woman, such things are long behind me. Daryanka tried to keep a straight, humble expression, but she couldn't hold back a giggle. Old, she thought, as if the very idea was laughable. Every woman in the area was jealous of Nesvana. When she walked down the street, men turned their heads like owls just to catch a glimpse of her. Daryanka knew this because she'd overheard the male guests gossiping about the innkeeper. Dancing is one thing, Nesvana continued. Why not dance? But taking gifts from boys, that's something else entirely. That, my dear, I don't like. I didn't roll up your sleeve, Nesvana interrupted. Not that one, the left. Blushing furiously, Daryanka rolled up her sleeve, revealing a narrow bracelet with turquoise stones. She should have hidden it better, but she just couldn't bring herself to part with it even for a little while. Nesvana looked like she was about to say something teasing, but suddenly her expression shifted. Her eyes grew sharp and serious. Look me in the eye and tell me the truth. Was it Semyonok who gave you this? The question startled Daryona so much that the flush drained from her cheeks. Semyonok? How could you say such a thing, Auntie Nesvana? If he'd even tried, I'd have told him, stick that bracelet on your nose and parade around like that. Nesvana exhaled in relief. Well then, that's not a disaster. Only half a disaster. But listen, girl, be careful with Semyonok. He might look like a harmless oaf, but he'll make you pay dearly for any gift he gives. I know, Auntie Nesvana. Semyonok's slimy. Remember Bereska? She only took a little ribbon from him, and even that she had to throw back at him in front of everyone to get rid of him. Exactly. He doesn't give gifts for free. But you, my dear, still aren't behaving properly. Word is you've been dancing with the boys and taking gifts from them. Oh, really? Daryona lifted her chin. And who are these wise and all-seeing people spreading gossip about me? Well, not people exactly. More like old Terabika. Daryona fell silent, baffled. How could Terabika know about Zvanko? What could that old crow possibly know about her? The woman was so ancient she looked ready to crumble to dust. They said she sold potions. Not the kind that cured ailments, but the ones women whispered about to each other, glancing over their shoulders to make sure their husbands didn't hear. She stopped me in the street and started talking about you, Nesvana confirmed, noticing the girl's confusion. She even had the nerve to say I wouldn't have to look after you much longer. Was she talking about marriage, perhaps? Natural lie. I told her I'd rip her vile tongue out and hang it on the fence to dry. But now, my dear, you're going to tell me who this prince or king's son is that's been showering you with fancy gifts. Tell her about Zvanko? But that story would start with that wretched Semyonok. His father, a wealthy merchant, was nicknamed Som, or Catfish, for his round face, bulging eyes, and drooping mustache. And Semyonok was the spitting image of him, except he hadn't grown a mustache yet. He latched on to Daryona at the very start of the fair's first day, pestering her to go on the swings with him. And Daryona had shot back. Like you went with Beliana. Semyonok huffed like a boiling kettle, complaining that people wouldn't let him live that incident down. Sure, the girl had fallen off the swing. Accidents happen. She just couldn't hold on. She'd broken her leg herself. But Beliana told a different story. According to her, Semyonok had pushed her off on purpose for laughs. He had laughed as he shoved her. That had been a few years ago, when he was even dumber than he was now. So Dariona told him, "Go find a leshy to swing with you." Semyonok got offended, and grabbed her braid, and his friend Vatorak burst out laughing. Then came a voice nearby. "Let go of her braid. It's not carrot greens." Semyonok was so startled, he let go. That was Dariona's chance to either run away or burst into tears. But why give Semyonok, that scoundrel, the satisfaction of fear? As Nesvana had taught her, look fear in the eyes, and fear will blink first. So Dariona calmly smoothed her tousled hair. She didn't even glance at the person who'd stood up for her at first. But when she did look, he seemed like an ordinary boy, just a little older than Dariona, not much taller and not particularly broad-shouldered. But his eyes, bold, sharp like a hawk's, made Semyonok take a step back. Then Semyonok snapped out of it and indignantly demanded, "And who do you think you are, giving me orders? Vtarusha, get him got it." Vatorak was thrilled. Vatorak was almost 20. A lazy good-for-nothing. He should have been working in the forge with his father, but instead he trailed after Semyonok, who kept him happy with sweets and pastries. In return, Vatorak roughed up anyone who got on his friend's nerves. Grinning ear to ear, Vatorak stepped toward Dariona's defender, swinging his arm back for a punch. The next moment, Dariona didn't quite understand what had happened. Somehow the hulking fool tripped, let out a short wheeze, and dropped to his knees, doubled over. "You'll be fine," the boy said sternly. "I didn't hurt you, just knocked the wind out of you. Get up and we'll continue." Apparently, along with his breath, Vatorak's courage had been knocked out as well. He couldn't speak, but he shook his head so vigorously it was clear to anyone. There wouldn't be a fight, he was just passing through. Once he got up, he'd go on his way and wouldn't even look back. "And you?" The boy turned to Semyonok matter-of-factly. Semyonok backed away to a safe distance and spat venomously. "I'll get you for this?" "You already got me," the boy said, feigning confusion. "Why would you need to catch me again?" "Come closer and throw your punch," Semyonok spat again and stalked off, not even stopping to help his friend up. The victor turned to Dariona. "So, is it just him you didn't want to go on the swings with, or are you scared? If it's just him, let's go have a ride. But if you're scared, we can just walk around the fair, check out the market, and munch on some gingerbread." Dariona tilted her nose up defiantly and declared that only little kids were afraid of swings. She quickly realized she'd been too quick to boast. Zvanko, as the boy was called, pushed the wooden swingboard on its long rope so high that her heart nearly stopped, and everything blurred before her eyes. Whether she screamed or not, she couldn't recall. If she didn't, it wasn't out of bravery. It was because, like Vatorak earlier, the breath had been knocked out of her chest. When the swing finally stopped and Dariona climbed off, she found she couldn't take a single step. She had to lean on Zvanko's arm, and it turned out to be a very pleasant experience. The market stalls were still there. The gingerbread hadn't disappeared, but sweeter than anything was simply talking, sharing stories about their lives. They discovered they had much in common. Like Dariona, Zvanko was an orphan. But while Dariona had been taken in immediately by Auntie Nesvana after her mother's passing, Zvanko had apparently endured quite a bit of hardship. He didn't complain, but his question said a lot. "Does she beat you?" He was talking about Auntie Nesvana, of all people, but life had eventually improved for Zvanko as well. He'd been taken in by Mulchan, a man he called uncle. Dariona couldn't quite figure out if the man was actually related to Zvanko or just someone who took pity on the boy. But Zvanko assured her that Molchan Gorazdik was a skilled and experienced man who had taught him a lot. The two had come to Zvenets as part of a merchant caravan, hired as guards by one of the traders. "And where are you staying? Don't tell me it's at Kurliaka's place," Dariona asked jealously. She couldn't stand the owner of the second inn in Zvenets, a rival to the Peaceful Hearth. "It's a shame you're not staying with us." For a moment, she imagined Zvanko sitting at their table while she served him a bowl of thick goose noodle soup. "I think so too," Zvanko nodded. "But Uncle Molchan has a widow friend over in the Potter's Quarter, so we're staying with her." "Did Molchan teach you to fight? You handled Vadarak so skillfully." "No," the boy smiled. "That was earlier. I used to live in a big village. Every holiday, the men from one end would line up against the men from the other and fight. Not all at once, though. The older men would send the boys in first to stir things up, and the boys gave it their all, beating each other senseless. I wasn't the last one standing in those fights. Not even when I was just 5. I also kept an eye on the grown men learning their tricks. Molchan happened to pass through the village during one of the holidays. He stopped to watch the fighting for fun and noticed me, and what? Did he give you that bracelet at your first meeting? Auntie Nesvana asked, with a hint of mockery. Oh no, how could I? Taking gifts from someone I didn't even know? He gave it to me at our second meeting. By then we were already acquainted, Dariona replied, lowering her eyes modestly. Nesvana chuckled dryly. Well, that's quite the logic you've got there. But fine. It's not an expensive piece, so there's no great harm in you accepting it. What worries me is something else. What, Auntie Nesvana? I taught you not to tell your name to strangers the first time you meet them, didn't I? You did, to keep them from cursing me, or worse. And if a stranger asks your name, what are you supposed to say? Call me Little Duck, or I'm called what I was called yesterday, or they call me what I'm called, Dariona recited brightly. Then her face fell. Oh no, you don't mean because I told him my name is Dariona, do you? But he's not a stranger, Auntie Nesvana, not at all. It didn't even cross my mind. Nesvana gave her a pitying look. Boys, when you ask them their names, can answer with a playful rhyme too. Like, call me Zvanko, call me Zvano. That's why I'm wondering, do you even know your friend's real name? Dariona gasped. She understood. Zvanko, could it be that he didn't trust her? Was he afraid of a curse or something worse? Never mind, Nesvana sighed. Morning is wiser than evening. It's time for bed, but let's set some turnips to bake in the oven for tomorrow. Peel them, girl, and slice them up. Dariona nodded, lost in thought. Nesvana absent-mindedly picked up a knife and began scraping at the already clean tabletop. Then she stopped, looked at the knife in her hand, and glanced at the girl. Dariona sat on the bench, peeling a small, firm turnip with an expression of absent concentration. She was using a different knife. Where did that one come from? The innkeeper asked in surprise. The girl flinched, momentarily confused, before smiling. Oh, I completely forgot. It's my find from today. I found it in the woods this morning when I went mushroom picking with the other girls. Came home empty-handed as far as mushrooms go, but I still brought something back. And then the goat got loose from the pen and started chasing old man Karas around the yard. I ran to grab the goat by the horns and completely forgot about the knife. It stayed right there in the basket, and now my hands just naturally reached for it. Let me see. Nesvana turned the knife over in her hands. What a fine one. It'll come in handy. Dariona was glad for the distraction from her troubled thoughts. I got a little lost, fell behind the other girls. No doubt it was a Leshy leading me astray. I ended up where the black stream flows into the Gremyatka River. That's the spot where people say they found a girl murdered 5 years ago. That was before my time in Zvenets. But yes, I've heard about it. So I was relieved to find the Gremyatka's bank and started following it downstream. Before long, I heard the other girls calling out to each other. And what did I teach you? If a leshy leads you astray, sit down and switch your shoes. Put the right one on the left foot. Or turn your shirt inside out. Did you find the knife by the riverbank? No, further up the black stream. There's a fallen tree there, and the knife was stuck in the stump. The knife slipped from Nesvana's fingers and landed on the floor with a dull thud. Stuck. Nesvana's voice dropped, hoarse. In a stump? Dariona widened her eyes in response, unsure how to reply. In 2 years, she'd seen Nesvana in all sorts of moods. Cheerful, sad, exhausted, even angry enough to pick a fight. But this was the first time she'd seen her afraid. Nesvana had gone pale, raised her hands to her temples as though to steady herself, then grabbed Dariona by the shoulders. She pulled the girl off the bench and into a fierce embrace, as if to reassure herself that Dariona was still there. Then she pushed her back onto the bench, rushed to the open window, slammed the shutters closed, and latched them with an iron hook. She turned back, breathing heavily. "Oh, what have you done, my dear girl?" she said mournfully. "What a terrible thing you've brought upon yourself. Couldn't you have guessed that knives don't just stick out of stumps in the middle of the forest for no reason? Did you hear that howling on the outskirts? That howling is for you." With an effort, Nesvana forced herself to calm down. Her voice returned to something close to normal. "Have you heard of werewolves? Wolf people. Do you know how they transform? They leap through a knife stuck in a stump, from left to right. When they've had their fill of running wild in the forest, they leap back through the knife, from right to left, and turn human again. But you pulled the knife out. Now the wolf can't turn back into a man, and that's why it's howling. That's why it's come as far as Zvenets." Dariona gasped. But Nesvana was already herself again, strong, fearless, sardonic. "Don't be afraid, girl. We'll find a ford in any river and we'll turn any wolf into a fur coat. But mark my words. From now on, you're not to set foot outside the yard. No market, no visiting friends, no swimming in the river. Not until we deal with that cursed werewolf. And if it dares show its face here, I'll meet it myself. You've nothing to fear, Dariona. I didn't feed you bread and porridge for 2 years just to hand you over to some mangy beast. Now go to bed. I'll put the turnips in the oven myself. And tomorrow I'll give you so much work, you'll forget all about wolves." Hard work drives fear from the soul left alone in her small room. Dariona shed a few tears. Maybe it would have been best for her to cry her heart out and fall asleep, dreamless. But through her fear and turmoil, one thought surfaced, eclipsing everything else. Tomorrow, Zvanko and Uncle Molchan would leave. She hadn't mentioned that to Nesvana. Nor had she said anything about the meeting she and Zvanko had arranged, at dawn under the old willow by the riverbank. That's when Zvanko would tell her what even he hadn't known yesterday, where they were going and when they planned to return to Zvenets. But now it seemed Dariona wouldn't make it to the willow. She wouldn't say goodbye to such a good boy. She wouldn't tell him she'd wait for him. And Zvanko would think she didn't care. That she'd stayed away on purpose. And that was worse than any trouble with werewolves or enchanted knives. Her tears dried instantly. She'd been told to stay home, and she would. Not a step beyond the threshold. Not even the smallest one. But after Zvanko left, she had to meet him under the willow. She had to. There was nothing to think about. But Auntie Nesvana rose early. far too early to sneak past. Maybe it had been possible to slip away before, but not anymore. For the first time in 2 years, a flicker of resentment toward Nesvana crossed her mind. She'd be watching, sharp-eyed, every step of the way that left only one option: to sneak out now, while no one was watching. At night. She'd wait under the willow until morning just to see Zvanko and say a couple of words. Nothing more. Then she'd come straight home, confess her disobedience to Nesvana, and likely get the first scolding, or worse, of her life. She'd earned it, after all. The front door was out of the question. It meant walking past Nesvana's room. The floorboards creaked, and Nesvana was a light sleeper. The door to the porch creaked too. If she'd thought ahead, she could have oiled the hinges, but there was another way. A proven one. Through the window. And there was a loose board in the fence. It slid aside, just enough for her to squeeze through. And to hell with whoever might be roaming the streets of Zvenets at night. Werewolves, vampires, or death herself in the guise of Morena. Dariona had no choice. She could only hope no one crossed her path. But she'd better take the knife. After all, a knife to the eye wouldn't sit well with even a werewolf. In that moment, Dariona looked very much like Nesvana. Calm, firm, and fearless. Her courage lasted for nearly half the journey. For some reason, it was the silence that frightened her most. Even the dogs behind the fences didn't bark at the lone figure wandering the late-night streets. Their canine instincts must have sensed something strange about the night, something dangerous. And so, if they wanted to see dawn, they wisely hid in their kennels and stayed quiet. As she passed the outlying houses, Dariona kept to the shadows, avoiding the streams of moonlight that bathed the sleeping town. She pressed herself close to the fences and reminded herself that by morning, Zvanko would be gone. That thought kept her going, stopping her from running back to the familiar, safe haven of the peaceful hearth. When the houses ended and the rustling of riverside bushes began. Why are they rustling when there's no wind? She told herself. The willow is closer than home now. She didn't understand why the willow seemed like a safe place, where no harm could come to her. But when she reached the old tree, bending over the water, she felt no relief. She descended to the riverbank, sat on an exposed root, and waited. Her heart ached as she listened to the splash of fish playing in the water and the rustling branches, bracing herself for that terrible, haunting howl. Dariona tried to push away the thought that the werewolf might approach in silence. She also did her best not to think about the poor choice of their meeting place. Up the bank, just a little way, was the old cemetery. People told terrifying stories about it, the kind you could laugh off in the bright sunlight, dismissing them as tall tales. But at night those same stories crept back into your mind, refusing to be laughed at. When the moonlight was suddenly blocked by a dark figure, Dariona nearly flung herself into the river in terror. She didn't even manage a scream before she heard a familiar voice. Darionushka. You came, smart girl. Zvanko. The boy nimbly leapt down onto the willow's roots and placed his hands on her shoulders. I couldn't sleep. I thought I'd come early so we wouldn't waste a single moment of our time together. And then it came. That howl, mournful, menacing, chilling to the bone, echoed from somewhere nearby. Dariona didn't even realize how she ended up clutching Zvanko's shirt with both hands, her face buried in his chest. Zvanko turned toward the sound and said quietly, "Don't be afraid. I won't let anything hurt you." Dariona hiccuped a sob and began explaining. Zvanko sighed. You've gotten yourself into a mess, my little crystal bead, like a fox caught in a trap. The crystal bead sat silently, forlorn. Only now did Dariona fully grasp the depth of the trouble she was in. At the peaceful hearth, with Nesvana by her side, it hadn't seemed so terrible. She just had to stay home, and Nesvana would figure something out eventually. But here? What could anyone figure out? "I've heard a bit about werewolves," Svanko said, staring into the darkness past Dariona's head. "I could handle an ordinary wolf, but they say not all weapons work on these creatures. Still, there's always a way if you know what to do." Dariona didn't answer. What was there to say? She wanted to tell him. "Go, Svanko, while you're still alive. If someone has to die, let it be me. Why should you risk your life?" "You mustn't show me the knife," Svanko said grimly. Wordlessly, Dariona handed him her dangerous find, hilt first. Svanko turned the knife over in his hands, inspecting it, then gave it back to her. "If this were just an ordinary person causing trouble, I'd take you to Uncle Mulchin for advice. He's clever and has seen a lot in his time. But since it's not a person, but something unnatural. There's an old woman living here in Svenets. Everyone calls her Terebika. Uncle Mulchin says she knows all about dark creatures and magic. I know where she lives. She's the one who can tell us how to deal with a werewolf. I know Terebika. She's just an old fool. And a nasty one at that. We know the sleds are crooked. But we've got to ride them anyway," Svanko said with a bitter smile. "Maybe she's nasty, but there's no one else to ask. Besides, Uncle Mulchin wouldn't have mentioned her for no reason. A few years back, he went to that old Wolverine for some answers. She gave him the information he needed, though she made him pay plenty for it. But I've got money. We'll pay her. We won't be stingy. But it's the middle of the night. She's sleeping. And what? We're supposed to just sit here until morning. Come on. Let's drag the old hag out of bed." Nesvana was not asleep. She hadn't even gone to bed or started undressing for the night. Before the girl, she'd put on a brave face. But now, alone, she paced the room like a caged beast, her thoughts racing. First, she tried to recall everything she'd ever heard about werewolves. If only she'd known sooner, she'd have asked her Nava for every detail. She'd have questioned every old soul she'd ever met, saying, "You've lived a long life, Grandpa. Don't you know anything about werewolves? How to destroy such a creature?" Next, her mind turned to her acquaintances in the Potter's Quarter. Who might she visit tomorrow to inquire about the widow hosting those two lodgers, the younger and the older one? Nesvana couldn't recall any such widow, even though she was well acquainted with the women of the Potter's Quarter. She needed to find out who this boy was, spinning Dariona's head, and who this Mulchin Gorazdik was, wandering the world with him. Would either of them bring harm to the girl? Then came the memory of Terebika's words. You won't have to look after Dariona much longer. What had she meant? Marriage, or something worse? Nesvana decided she'd have to shake the truth out of the old crone. But there was something else. A nagging feeling, like a grain of sand in her eye that wouldn't let her rest. Nesvana forced herself to relax. She pushed away the unnecessary thoughts. The memories of werewolves faded. Terebika's yellow, withered, wrinkle-woven face disappeared. Suspicion of the strange boy who had appeared out of nowhere and bewitched her foster daughter dissolved. One thing remained, something that had slipped by unnoticed during the earlier conversation, now standing tall before her, sharp, hard, terrifying. Dariona's voice echoed in her mind. I wandered to where the black stream flows into the Gremiaka River. That's where, they say? A girl was found murdered 5 years ago. It was as if a veil had been lifted from Nesvana's eyes. She understood. Nesvana shot out of her room like a bird and dashed to Dariona's small chamber. She didn't scream or faint in terror when she saw the room empty. Terabika didn't need to be dragged out of bed. The old woman was already standing at her gate, wide open, waiting for them. Clad entirely in black, bathed in moonlight, she was as frightening as death herself, Morana incarnate. Dariona instinctively took a step back, but immediately felt ashamed of her fear. Now was not the time to be scared of an old woman. She had far bigger things to fear. "I knew you'd come," Terabika said without so much as a greeting, "and I knew it would be trouble. Just didn't know what kind." "Start talking," girl Dariona gratefully touched Zvanko's elbow. He had been right. Terabika was indeed one of those who could see through stone walls. The girl began her story, about the forest, the stump, the knife, and the howling that now haunted Svenets. She tried to speak clearly, without stumbling and without tears. "I heard the howling too," Terabika said calmly. "I just didn't know it was you, girl, who caused it." Dariona hiccuped a sob. "It's not her fault," Zvanko quickly interjected in her defense, "but fate's. She just got unlucky. I've never heard of fate wandering through the woods and picking up things it shouldn't." Terabika retorted sharply, turning back to the girl. "Well, girl, you've spun the thread, now you'll have to weave the cloth. If you don't return the knife to its place before dawn, you won't live past noon." "But," Auntie Nesvana said. Dariona began, only to be cut off by Terabika. "Auntie Nesvana? Then go hide behind her skirts. You've got time until noon." Zvanko squeezed Dariona's shoulder, a silent warning to stay quiet, and said, "Then we'd better stop talking and get to work. Summer nights are short. I'll go and put the knife back myself." "That won't work," the old woman said firmly. "You didn't take the knife from the forest. It's not your place to return it." Dariona gave Terabika a solemn, measured bow. "Thank you for the lesson, Granny Terabika. No one pushed me to do this. No one whispered advice. I made this mess myself, and I'll face it myself. I'll head to the forest right now." "You're not going alone," Zvanko said harshly. "Don't even argue. I'm coming with you." "And do you know how to put the knife back? What words to say? What to do?" Terabika scoffed. "Oh, you young fools." "Then teach us," Granny Zvanko began. "You're not my pupil for me to teach you my secret words," Terabika grumbled. "Ah, I cast the beans today and saw a journey, not far, but dangerous. Maybe it's to the forest with you? But I'm too old for such outings. My legs are weak. Every bone aches for the trouble and the inconvenience, Granny. I'll pay you as soon as we're back," Dariona offered quickly. In the moonlight, the old woman's hawk-like gaze pierced into her face. "Yes, girl," Terabika said. "You will pay me for my trouble." The shutters were flung open. The wretched girl had escaped through the window. And the knife was gone. That knife. What had Nesvana been thinking all evening? That cursed blade should have been hidden better. But who could have guessed that foolish Dariona would sneak out in the middle of the night? Or had the howling lured her out, pulling her against her will? Nesvana grabbed the axe by the stove, the one she used for splitting firewood. A good axe. Heavy, but it fit her hand well. People said werewolves couldn't be harmed by just any weapon. Well, she'd test tonight what was tougher, the werewolf's skull or her axe. What else should she take? Her gaze flicked to the stove. Were the coals still alive? Though people said fire didn't bother those two-faced creatures. She set the axe down and grabbed a small clay pot, opening the stove's door. The coals glowed a smoky crimson, their flames long gone. Suddenly it felt as though she heard the stove whisper, What do you want, mistress? Why disturb me? Forgive me, Svarojic, keeper of my hearth, she murmured fervently. Your work is to warm our home, to cook our food, to help the blacksmith in his forge. I know it's wrong to call you to battle, but please understand, a child's life is at stake. My dear little girl. She scooped some coals into the pot and stood, feeling an unexpected lightness. What was that I just said? She wondered fleetingly, tying her kerchief tightly. What came over me? Strange, it wasn't speaking to the fire that puzzled her. Many housewives whispered to the hearth, calling upon Svarog's son to help with their daily struggles. No, it was something else. Nizvana had never believed it was wrong to use fire against an enemy. If a beast or a thief approached her campfire at night, they'd feel the business end of a burning stick. But suddenly these coals, which had so kindly warmed her home, seemed too pure, too good to kill with. And what was that I said about Dariona? She mused, hurriedly wrapping her shawl around the pot. A little girl? She's grown enough to marry. 14, just the right age. Or maybe not yet. No, she's not ready. I'll bring her back home, but I'll wait before letting her marry. She's still a green berry. She's got the figure for it, but her mind still needs to ripen. The thoughts of Dariona's future wedding calmed Nizvana a little. One day, the girl would stand under the wedding crown, bear children. It was only as she walked down the street, axe in one hand and the pot of coals wrapped in her shawl in the other, that she recalled her earlier inexplicable words. Did I just call my foster child my own daughter? Have I grown attached to her? That's no good. I swore to myself after I was widowed that I wouldn't let my heart get tied to anyone again. And yet, here I am, marching alone into the dark forest with an axe on my shoulder to fight a werewolf. A warrior woman in a skirt. That's what a foolish heart does to a person. It drives them to madness. Dariona had worried that frail old Terabika might slow them down on their difficult path through the night forest. But the crone seemed almost rejuvenated, moving so briskly that the boy and girl struggled to keep up. She never once glanced back, as if she didn't care whether her companions followed or got lost. Her black figure loomed faintly ahead in the moonlight. Dariona herself lagged behind. How could she not, in this eerie forest where moonlight and shadow wove together? Her skirt caught on fallen trees, roots, and waist-high ferns. Fortunately, Zvanko stayed by her side, step for step, steadying her, keeping her from falling. Why is it so quiet, Zvanko? Not even the night birds are calling quiet. You're making enough noise for 10. And the birds aren't silent. An owl just hooted across the river. You heard that? You've got such sharp hearing. Zvanko, keep walking. Stop talking. Move to the right or you'll end up in the thorns. It's just a black shadow. How do you know it's thorn bush, Zvanko? Smells like young berries. You could smell that? What a sharp nose you have, Zvanko, keep walking. Stop talking. Your skirt's caught on a branch. Untangle it. You could see that. How sharp your eyes are at night, Zvanko, keep walking. Stop talking. We've reached the black stream. Why do your eyes shine so strangely, Zvanko? A massive dark gray wolf stood in the small clearing. It stood like a master of the space. Unhidden and unthreatened, one paw resting on the stump of a great fallen tree. Above the stump, the branches of nearby trees formed a sparse lattice, an intricate vault through which moonlight rained down. The wolf's eyes glowed with a green fire, reflecting the silvery light. Dariona bowed deeply to the beast, speaking boldly and firmly, as if addressing a neighbor and not a monster. Forgive me, mighty forest master. I took your knife out of ignorance. I brought it back and admit my fault. Allow me to make it right and return the knife to the stump." Just as it was, laughter erupted behind her. Youthful, ringing, and so malevolent that Dariona, who until then hadn't taken her eyes off the terrifying wolf, couldn't help but turn toward this new danger. It was Terabika who was laughing. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her black figure merging with the surrounding branches. Whether they embraced her or tried to hold her back, it was hard to say. Her face was hidden in shadow, but her voice had changed, now as young and sharp as her laughter. "Oh, I can't take it. That's rich. How does Nesvana tolerate such a fool in her house? Does she really think she can stick the knife back into the stump and that'll be the end of it? No, little dove. First, that knife will find its place in your throat. Hey, that wasn't part of the deal." Zvanko stepped forward, shielding Dariona with his body. "There wasn't any deal to begin with," Terabika replied brazenly. "Did Molchan Gorazdik not tell you how he first drove that knife into the stump?" The words needed no answer, but Zvanko, caught off guard, shook his head. No, he didn't. A low, rolling growl came from the stump. The wolf was growing agitated. Yet neither Dariona nor Zvanko looked at it. Their attention was fixed on Terabika, who now seemed more dangerous than the wolf. The crone was unfazed by the growl, and continued with relish, clearly savoring each word. "So he didn't tell you, eh? Didn't tell you how he lured poor little Vesnyanka into the forest? Didn't tell you whose blood he spilled to seal his bargain?" Her mocking tone abruptly vanished. When she spoke again, her voice was somber, even grim, reverting to its raspy, aged timbre. "Fools think becoming a werewolf is simple. Stick a knife in a stump, leap over it, and off you go, prowling the woods as a wolf. If it were that easy, everyone would be running as wolves. No, you can't change your form without the master's permission. And I'm not talking about the Leshy. No, not the Leshy. I mean, the ancient god who rules over wild beasts. The one whose name I dare not utter. Yes, the one with the bear's head. And he takes no offering but life itself." Terabika suddenly tensed and glanced around, sniffing the air like an animal. "Who's there? Someone's here." I can feel it. Dariona froze in terror. Was it him, the one with the bear's head? The wolf stopped growling and sniffed the air as well. "There's no one here," Zvanko shouted angrily. "I'd hear it. I'd smell it. You and your Uncle Molchan don't sense magic," Terabika snapped. "But I do. And right now..." She suddenly shrieked a string of unintelligible words, her voice sharp and piercing. Until that moment, she had been a shadowy, indistinct figure. But now, the moonlight illuminated her fully, revealing every wrinkle, and Dariona thought she glimpsed a forked, snake-like tongue flicker between the crone's bared teeth. There. Terabika cried with venomous hatred. Everyone turned to where her commanding hand pointed. In the middle of the clearing, the moonlight thickened into a column and then dissolved, revealing a woman holding an axe in one hand and a small bundle in the other. Dariona gasped, but Nesvana was unshaken. "Good evening, everyone," she said calmly, without a trace of fear. "Good people. Isn't it a bit late for my Dariona to be out? Don't you think it's time for her to come home? So you've come, you half-learned fool?" Terabika hissed menacingly. "And you don't even realize the master with the bear's head will take 2 sacrifices tonight? Oh, is that what's going on here?" Nesvana's tone grew sharper. "And you wicked old hag, didn't think that offering sacrifices to you-know-who might get tricky, with an axe buried in your forehead? You don't need much knowledge to land a good swing to the skull." The wolf crouched, preparing to leap, but Nesvana turned to it just in time. "Try it, good sir, just open your jaws," she snapped. I've got a pot full of stove embers right here, straight down your throat, and you'll have your fill. The wolf froze. Fire can't harm a werewolf. Terabika screeched. Is that so? Nesvana replied mockingly, locking eyes with the wolf. If you're so sure, Wolf-Face, come closer. I'd be curious to see what happens. The wolf stepped back. Let them both go, Molchan Gorazdik. Zvanko's voice cut through the tension, firm and steady. The wolf roared in reply, deep and menacing. Zvanko, is that you? Nesvana asked, not turning to look at the young man. You've got a real talent for picking lovely spots to take a girl on a stroll. Zvanko didn't answer her sarcasm. Instead, he bowed to the wolf. Molchan Gorazdik, you've done so much for me. If you need blood to become human again, take mine. Or take Terabika's blood, Dariona said venomously from behind his elbow. Hey now! The crone screeched in alarm. If you kill me, who's going to perform the ritual? Certainly not this half-trained girl. She pulled the knife. Only her life can fix this mistake. Don't bother, boy. Nesvana sighed with grim sympathy. You could perform 3 rituals, call on all the ancient gods until there's no room left on this clearing for them, and it still wouldn't make your Uncle Molchan human again. Why not? Zvanko asked cautiously. Yes, why not? Terabika echoed angrily. The wolf stepped forward, not threateningly, but with curiosity. It seemed even he was surprised. He hasn't been human for a long time, Nesvana explained calmly. He didn't become a beast the first time he leapt over the knife. He became one the moment he slit that girl Vesnyanka's throat with it. From that moment, there's been no way back for him, and you'll have no way back either if you kill your girl. Or let someone else kill her. I won't let anyone lay a hand on Dariona, Zvanko said firmly. Then take her and leave, Nesvana shouted, her voice blazing with defiance. I'll hold the beast off. Come on, you man-guy fur-coat. Her face burned with such a fierce fighting spirit that the wolf backed away once again. I won't leave you, Dariona whimpered. Drag her out, Zvanko. Carry her if you have to. Nesvana stepped closer to the stump. Zvanko and the wolf were both fixated on Nesvana's bold defiance. But Dariona, as if someone had pushed her, turned to look at Terabika. Forgotten by everyone else. What she saw made her freeze. The old woman had raised her hands in front of her, fingers weaving an invisible thread in the air. Dariona didn't have time to scream, didn't have time to warn Nesvana. Terabika clicked her tongue sharply, the sound like the crack of a whip. From above, out of the branches entwined over the clearing, massive spiders rained down on Nesvana's head and shoulders like snow. Within moments, the woman was cocooned in pale webbing. She dropped the axe as she struggled to free herself, but it was futile. The axe fell near the stump. Her left hand, still clutching the pot of embers, was pinned to her torso by the sticky threads. Only her eyes, blazing with helpless fury, and her nose remained visible. Her mouth was sealed by the web. It had all happened so quickly that neither Dariona nor Zvanko could react in time. They didn't even fully grasp what was happening. Auntie Nesvana Dariona cried out in anguish and ran toward the immobilized woman. But before she could reach her, Terabika pounced like a lynx, slamming the girl to the ground with shocking strength. Where had such power come from in the frail old crone? Terabika pinned Dariona down, pressing her into the grass, leaving her barely able to move. Zvanko Dariona whimpered. She turned her head with great effort, trying to see the clearing, and realized that Zvanko wouldn't be coming to her aid. Man and beast were locked in combat, rolling across the clearing like a spinning ball. In horror, Dariona saw the wolf pin Zvanko to the ground, its bared fangs inches from his throat. Wait, Terabika shouted, her voice suddenly youthful again. "Don't kill him yet. Let me talk to the boy, Molchan Gorazdik." "Hey, Zvanko, listen to me, or I'll crush your girl. Will you listen? I will." Zvanko choked out, struggling for air. "Let him go, Molchan Gorazdik. Let him stand. He won't try anything foolish. I just need to talk to him. And then he'll do whatever he thinks is best." The wolf released Zvanko, who staggered to his feet. Dariona strained her neck, trying desperately to see his face. But from her vantage point on the ground, she could only see him from the waist down. His fists were clenched tightly. Terabika spoke with unexpected softness, almost sympathy. "You're a brave one, Zvanko. You'd give your life for your girl without a second thought, wouldn't you?" "I would," Zvanko replied, his tone sharp with distrust. "And what about your eyes? Would you give them for her, your hearing? How would you feel living the rest of your life as a cripple? The world so vast and beautiful around you, but you unable to see or hear it. What are you and Uncle Molchan scheming now? What kind of evil trick is this?" "Oh, my boy, oh no. Nothing like that. Don't call me son." "You vile hag," Zvanko spat angrily. "If I were truly related to you, I'd drown myself out of shame." "As you wish, Zvanko, I won't," Terabika replied, her tone smooth and calculated. "But let me remind you of something. Do you remember the first time you leapt over the knife? You were terrified, not of your hands and feet turning into paws, but of how vast the world suddenly became. You could see farther, hear farther, and smell farther. Isn't that right?" "Well, yes. Tell me," Terabika coaxed, her voice softening further. "Please tell me. I'll never experience it myself, only through the words of others." Dariona, still pinned to the ground, saw Zvanko's fists unclench. He spread his hands in a helpless, uncertain gesture. "How can I explain it?" he said, his voice tinged with wonder. "No one who hasn't felt it could understand. The world grew so much bigger, and I felt like I'd grown too, like the treetops had moved closer to me. I could see rafts floating down the Gremiaka and hear the rafters calling to each other, catching every word. But the smells..." Zvanko's voice became animated as he found the right words. "I had no idea there were so many in the world. They hit me like a wave at first. I almost fainted. But then I could sense each one separately. They didn't blend together, and each one told me something. Most of all..." Zvanko paused, his eyes lighting up. All of it was mine. In that moment, I was the master of everything. Dariona stifled a sob of despair. Whatever Terabika was scheming, she was succeeding. Zvanko's voice no longer carried anger. It was almost joyful. "And when you turned back into a human," the crone continued slyly, "did you lose it all at once? Did it feel awful? Don't even remind me." Zvanko exhaled bitterly. It was like going blind and deaf in an instant. Life felt so empty, I wanted to tie a rock around my neck and throw myself into the Gremiaka. The only thing that kept me going was Uncle Molchan's promise. "Just wait, boy. Soon you'll see, hear, and smell like that even in human form." And did it happen? Did his promise come true? Almost. I see better than before. Hear better too. My sense of smell isn't as strong, but it's still far beyond any human's. "Ah," Terabika exclaimed, seizing her opportunity. "You said it yourself. You're no longer human, Zvanko. You're not like those pitiful, crippled mortals. They'll never see the world the way you do. You and Molchan Gorazdik are its true masters. Soon you'll come into your full power, and those wretched humans will finally know their place beneath you. And you want to trade all that away for a trifle? To cripple yourself like the rest of them for some green girl. Just one among a dozen like her. Where did you find her? At the fair. You'll have plenty more fairs in your life. and plenty more girls." Zvanko was silent. Dariona prayed silently to her ancestors for protection. "Zvanko is silent," she wanted to cry out. "Don't listen to her, Zvanko, you're human." But Terabika's hand was on her throat, and Dariona knew that even a whisper would cost her her life. "You need to move past this," Terabika urged gently. "Yes, you'll grieve for a while, but then it will fade. You'll find another girl far more beautiful, and your power will remain with you. And you don't even have to do much. Just take 2 steps to the stump." And with mortal despair, with a crushing sense of doom, Dariona saw Zvanko take 2 steps toward the stump. If only I could see his face. She thought desperately. If our eyes met, the hag's cursed spell would break to dust. "Well done!" Terabika cooed triumphantly. "Now take the knife. It's lying right there on the stump." And he did. He reached out and took the knife. Dariona's heart split in 2. In that moment she wanted both to claw Zvanko's shameless eyes out, and to die right there, right then, on his blade. There was no life for her after this moment, so let it be his hand, his knife. Terabika's voice took on a playful reprimand. "Why'd you take it in your left hand? It'll be awkward. Move it to your right. I'll say the proper words, and those who need to will hear. Then we'll—" "No, don't you dare," Dariona didn't see Zvanko's face. But she saw his actions. He placed the knife back on the stump with his left hand, grabbed Nesvana's axe with his right, and brought the blade crashing down onto the knife. The knife shattered under the heavy blow, its handle tumbling to the ground. The wolf let out a short, furious howl and lunged at Zvanko, but the boy swung the axe's blunt end, striking the beast mid-air and knocking it off course. He spun to face the wolf, axe raised and ready. "You taught me a lot, Molchen Gorazdik," Zvanko shouted. "Now come at me and we'll see how much I've learned." Terabika, stunned by the turn of events, loosened her grip. Dariona seized her chance, sinking her teeth into the crone's bony wrist. Terabika howled in pain, and Dariona broke free. She didn't run to Zvanko. She didn't want to get in his way. Instead, she darted to Nesvana, clawing at the webbing that bound the woman. Dariona expected the threads to be impossibly strong, to require all her strength to tear. But at her first pull, the bindings fell away in a shower of pale dust. Freed, Nesvana grabbed the pot of embers with both hands and strode toward the clearing where Molchan and Zvanko faced each other. With wicked glee in her voice, she shouted, "Well, menfolk, let a woman take the lead!" Nesvana shouted boldly, "First I'll pour all these embers onto the gray head and into those fanged jaws. Then you can fight all you like to entertain yourselves, Molchen." A seasoned warrior who knew better than to act recklessly, growled furiously and retreated into the bushes. At that, Dariona couldn't hold back anymore. She plopped down on the stump and burst into bitter tears. Zvanko rushed to her side, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and whispering quiet words of comfort. Terabika, limping slightly, approached them. She spoke with weary disdain. "Oh, you fool! You utter fool! You don't even know how hard your life's about to become. Worse than a drunkard without his bottle. Far worse. The longing will eat you alive. I'll endure," Zvanko snapped, his voice cold. "Endure, then." "Endure," Terabika retorted bitterly. "But when it becomes unbearable, you'll come looking for me. We'll figure something out." That knife wasn't the only way Dariona's tears dried in an instant. "Auntie Nesvana," she sang sweetly, "hand me that pot of embers you brought all the way here. It's time I taught someone not to tempt my boyfriend into trouble." "And do you even know," Terabika interrupted hastily, "what happens to those who kill a witch?" "I don't know," Dariona replied, her voice icy, "but I'd love to find out." "Hand over the pot, Auntie Nesvana." At that, Terabika yanked the black scarf from her head, waved it dramatically, and vanished, melting into the shadows of the forest. Zvanko lowered his head gloomily. "She's right," he said heavily. "For me, nothing is over. I'm a werewolf, my dear, not a man. The forest will call me until I lose my mind. Aren't you afraid I'll go mad and tear you apart?" "You are a man." Dariona stomped her foot. "And don't you dare say otherwise. She's right," Nesvana agreed. "You're a man, but not like the rest. Your wolf's senses, your sight, your hearing, your smell are still with you, aren't they?" Zvanko nodded grimly. "And Terabika was right about something else," Nesvana continued. "It won't be easy for you. The wolf in you will stir, clawing to get out. I may be a half-trained fool, as that snake called me, but I could help you if you stay here in Svenets. But if you leave..." Nesvana spread her hands in resignation. "I wasn't planning on leaving," Zvanko said, glancing at Dariona. "I'll start looking for work today." "Oh, Auntie Nesvana," Dariona clapped her hands. "Since spring, we haven't found a new guard for the inn after the last one left. Zvanko, will you come guard our inn?" "With pleasure," the boy replied warmly. "Oh, you simpleton," Nesvana sighed, waving a hand. "Didn't even ask how much I'd pay you, or why the last guard left." Zvanko straightened, pretending to be stern. "Well then, why did your last guard leave?" "He kept dropping hints that I should sweeten his service," Nesvana said with a wry grin. "I promised to take the poker to him instead, and he got offended and left." She glanced at the brightening sky. "We'll talk money back at home. For now, we need to hurry. The guests will wake soon, and the innkeepers are nowhere to be found." As they walked along the Gremiotka River, Nesvana deliberately lagged behind Zvanko and whispered to Dariona, "You listen to me, girl. No nonsense. I know I'm letting a wolf into the sheepfold, but don't you worry. I'll be keeping both eyes on you." Dariona put on a serious, dignified expression and replied primly, "Auntie Nesvana, I don't even understand what you're talking about." Zvanko, walking ahead, turned and smirked. Both Nesvana and Dariona instantly remembered his sharp hearing and burst into laughter. Zvanko joined in, and the three of them walked on, light-hearted and triumphant. Even the distant, mournful howl of a wolf from deep in the forest couldn't dampen their victorious joy.